Hello, I'm David Honeyman, Principal Advisor Prevention at the Crime and Corruption Commission. This is International Fraud Awareness Week. Fraud is the invisible thief. Fraud can cost your organisation a great deal in terms of money, resources, reputation and lost time. Over the last 5 years, the CCC has received 3,337 allegations of misappropriation or unauthorised use of resources. These allegations relate to work areas such as payroll, inventory management, fleet management, accounts processing, procurement, grants administration, asset disposal and capital works. Our data shows that allegations about fraud have increased 700% between 2015-16, when we received 218 allegations, to 2019-20, when we received 1,538 allegations. There are currently some serious issues in Australia involving fraud in government. Allegations that the Chief Executive of Victoria's regional transport network, V-Line, received over $300,000 in cash after awarding contracts worth over $40 million for cleaning trains. The Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission is conducting hearings investigating whether procurement and tendering processes between V-Line and a commercial supplier have been corrupted or compromised. In Queensland, we have our own fraud stories to tell, but the most notorious would be the fraud of $16 million on Queensland Health by the fake Tahitian prince Joel Barlow. Although he was successfully prosecuted and cash and many assets were seized, there was an unrecovered shortfall of just under $5 million. The cost to the taxpayer far exceeded this due to the cost of the investigation, which included government employees from multiple agencies and an external consultant. To put the value of fraud into context, in 2020, the Australian Institute of Criminology published a report about fraud within and against the Commonwealth. The report did not deal with all frauds against the Commonwealth agencies, only the most harmful frauds caused by internal and external actors. The value of these frauds over the 3-year period from July 2016 to June 2019 totalled $335 million. The value of fraud in 2018-19 alone was enough to pay the salaries of 439 staff for 5 years on an average salary of $68,000. The key points about those frauds are: the average internal investigation took just over 1 year. The average external fraud investigation took just over 2 years. In most instances, the frauds were able to occur because the offender overrode an existing control, or there were either no checking or audit mechanisms in place, or if there were, they were poor. In most instances, these frauds were detected by a staff member or reported by a financial institution. This means it's likely that those frauds would have continued because internal controls and checking mechanisms were not working, and the frauds only came to light because someone noticed something and decided to act. As an example of how long frauds can continue, our own Queensland Audit Office report on fraud risk management, published in February 2018, says that 40% of frauds in Australia take place over a 5-year period before being discovered. One reason for this is that fraud is difficult to find because in most instances the property is intangible and not something you'd notice missing unless you were looking in the right place. We should all be concerned by these numbers and how hard it can be to identify fraud. I've just explained the hidden nature of fraud and the danger it can cause. I've also touched on the importance of reporting it because the longer it goes on, the more damage it causes. I'd like to spend a little time talking to you about 2 key areas that we see are important to you and to your organisation in helping to prevent fraud from happening, and also detecting fraud that might have happened. These areas are procurement and internal audit. The procurement and internal audit services in your agency are professional groups that operate under quite rigorous guidelines in addition to your agency's policies and processes. The procurement and internal audit services in your agency can advise you and can help you to make sure you don't accidentally breach the rules that guide you in your daily work. For example, agencies are required to have a procurement policy that imposes spending limits and rules about when you need to get verbal and written quotes. There have been instances where people have understood that once the dollar value of an order goes above a certain threshold, they are required to get written quotes. However, to save time, those people have split the orders. In many instances, there was no attempted fraud here, but the act of splitting the order to avoid the thresholds means that those people breached the purchasing guidelines, which resulted in a complaint of corrupt conduct. This is a simple example of how a quick phone call to your procurement officer can save you a lot of trouble later on, and their industry contacts can also save your agency money. Procurement's role is not confined to obtaining best value for money in goods and services. Procurement will assist you to reduce the likelihood of fraud over time because modern procurement practices rely on professionally qualified staff who continually develop their skills, particularly in the area of ethical purchasing practices, and procurement staff ensure they are well versed in complex procurement issues and fraud identification techniques in order to maintain the integrity of the procurement process. As an example of how procurement identified an attempted fraud, it was noticed that an email request to change the bank details for the payment of a certain supplier's invoice was false. The procurement officer was alerted by some small anomalies in the email and how it read. As a result, the attention to detail displayed by the procurement officer prevented the organisation from being defrauded of $109,000. At the CCC, we feel there are benefits for the organisation through your early involvement of your procurement officers for your procurement plans. The examples I have given demonstrate how they can help you stay within the procurement guidelines and how to identify fraud, but there are other benefits associated with procurement project management and probity that will be realised for you. The second key area in your organisation that we see as critical in dealing with fraud is your internal audit area. Internal audit is a powerful resource to assist agencies identify and learn from instances of historical and current fraud activity. Understanding how fraud occurs provides opportunities for continual improvement and information about how to prevent future frauds. Internal audit can be your trusted partner for achieving change, particularly where you have identified process risks that should be mitigated, but you are unsure how to interpret these risks into the organisational context. Internal audit work at the operational level. However, they are also involved in organisational risk identification and have input into systems design. If you have concerns that fraud might be happening, then internal audit can be your trusted agency partner to achieve change. For example, there were concerns that staff productivity in a certain work area was down. Internal audit were engaged to look at staff timesheets. It was discovered that some staff had lodged leave applications which contained minor errors. Whether these errors were accidental or deliberate is not known, but the leave applications were sent back to the staff member for correction and resubmitting. However, these applications were never corrected and were not resubmitted either. The outcome was that the staff member took leave, but their leave balances were never adjusted. This was an example of timesheet fraud with consequences for productivity because staff did not work on those leave days but still had leave balances to take at a later time. The solution recommended by internal audit resulted in electronic leave lodgement processes linked to electronic timesheets. As a result, staff could not avoid the leave application process and productivity increased. In our view, your organisation benefits from the commitment by internal audit to continuing professional development. This is achieved when the internal audit team commits to enhancing their skills by regularly participating in events to enhance their audit detection techniques across the service delivery programs in your agency, and by participating in technical information sessions about emerging audit technologies and techniques. You may know that the provision of large infrastructure projects is a key mechanism that governments use to provide major capital works. And these are facilitated through what is known as public-private partnership arrangements. Although this has the benefit of using commercial suppliers, it also means that key information that could be used to monitor the process of these partnerships arrangements is largely maintained by the commercial entity. An example of the professional expertise of internal audit is their contract management and monitoring skills. In this example, internal audit identified that the developer contributions that should have been charged were not being charged. Internal audit's review resulted in back payments being made by the developers, and that conservatively an additional $10 million in yearly revenue was secured. This amount was more than 10 times what the internal audit service cost per year. I hope you can see through these examples that procurement and internal audit play very important roles in your agency. They have wider responsibilities than you might first think. Our experience with procurement and internal audit is that they are highly qualified staff who are dedicated to their jobs, including detecting and preventing fraud. My message is, partnering with procurement and internal audit in your agency can help you achieve better outcomes. Also, when procurement and internal audit come to speak to you, it is not with the intention of making life difficult for you by insisting that the rules in your agency be followed. At the end of the day, they are safeguarding you from a future headache. So, it is recommended that you follow their advice. During International Fraud Awareness Week, we should all take the time to think about the invisible nature of fraud and to remind ourselves about the loss of productivity and the cost that fraud represents. It's also important to think about how you can maximise the fraud defences available to you in your job. If you think you have something to offer to improve your agency's anti-fraud efforts, please talk to your manager. You have the ability to improve your agency's anti-fraud performance by ensuring you follow the advice of your procurement and internal audit teams. They also need you to help them to be successful in their job. Thank you, and I wish you well with your International Fraud Awareness Week activities.